Now you're at home, welcome to joining the conversation. Go ahead and give us a call. Our lines are open, 011-542-1222. Tell us what you think with regards to this incident. Has society been so numbed that we see the reaction that happened leading up to the death of this young woman when she apparently committed suicide? Also joining me in studio to discuss this further, a student activist Fasiha Hassan is in studio. We also have Kamal Ali, that's a Wits SRC Deputy Secretary General. On the phone line, we'll have K. Makubela, the South African Police Service spokesperson, joining us in a few minutes. And also Marte Kutsia, South African Federation for Mental Health Program Manager for Information and Awareness, is also on the phone line, joining in the conversation. We'll start the conversation here in studio. You're from Wits SRC. Perhaps you can explain to us the events that led up to this young woman jumping to her death. There's been a lot of things that have been reported, but perhaps you could clarify some of the reports that we've heard. Obviously, a very horrific situation.
Yes, I mean, it's terribly sad what happened, we as the SRC are deeply saddened by the incident, and I mean, at this point in time, we really don't have all the information that's available. We want to allow for the investigation that the police have started to conclude before we make any assumptions and comments around the particular circumstances, that led up to the student ultimately taking her own life.
Right, but did you know the student? Maybe you may not have known her personally, but what kind of a student was she? From what you've heard, was she popular? Did she have any issues that she perhaps could not speak about that affected her and drove her to this desperate act?
Well, I didn't know the student personally, but I knew that she was an activist. She was a member of the EFF at Wits. So she was in active spaces. She had people around her all the time. So in terms of there being warning signs and that kind of thing, I mean, one can't really say, It's very difficult in these circumstances, As young people, we're not really sufficiently equipped to deal with this kind of thing when it presents itself.
Yeah. Fasiha, perhaps you could join in the conversation. As a student activist yourself, how do we find ourselves in a situation where students are jumping to their deaths with so much frustration, so much to deal with, obviously, just from your student life, your personal life, finances as well being a huge problem?
I wish I could say this was the first and the last tragedy that we've had to face. But even before this, we've had, so unfortunately, many students who've taken their own life in the past. And I think you're quite right. It's not just about, people think it's only about depression, and that, sometimes even the warning signs aren't as simple as people think there is, One of the elements of depression, and that's why we need awareness around it, is someone can seem very happy, very active, very energetic at times. And you'll never think that this person's depressed, and yet they do in fact suffer from sort of mental illness.
Right.
So I think there's a need for that level of awareness. But you're right, it's about more than that. There is just not enough support for students, particularly those who are in a financially difficult situation, those who are suffering academically, and also the student who passed away was in first year.
Wow.
Particularly difficult year for everyone.
Such a waste.
Very
just
difficult.
Last week we were marking World Mental Health Day. Obviously, that's part of the awareness that's going about. Is it really enough, when it comes to making sure that people, really there's another way? I mean, there's toll-free lines that people can call. Also very disturbing that there were people that are actually egging her on to go ahead and jump. Do you think there's a misconception out there, misperception that perhaps, people just do this for attention? Obviously not in this case.
I think that there's a lack of awareness that when people cry out and they say that they need help, the first assumption is the person's looking for attention. And that is a concern. We can never ever say that about someone. We don't know the difficulties that people face. And what people also struggle to understand is that depression is often a chemical imbalance in one's brain. So it's not that, people say try. It's not about the person not trying. It's that sometimes it's just too much.
Yeah.
And I was not personally there, so I cannot speak for whether people egged her on or not, but it speaks to a greater societal issue, and I think that's actually what we need to focus on. The fact that there's a greater issue of our society, particularly, and I'm of color as well, families of color not understanding and taking mental health issues as seriously as we should.
Absolutely. We have from the South African Police Service spokesperson, Mr. K. Makubela. So thank you very much for joining us. What role did police play in this part when this very disturbing incident happened in Braamfontein with this lady jumping to her life? There's reports that perhaps the police came in 2 hours later, and with regards to being capacitated with being able to handle a situation such as this one.
Yeah, thank you very much. what happened in this type of situation? Yes, we do have the people who are helping in terms of trying to stop people who are about to commit suicide, particularly whether they are inside the house or in a flat, as the 19-year-old girl was. The police will come and try to talk to the particular person to stop doing that and assure the person that life is not about problems, or if you have life, you must not actually tell yourself that problems is only on you, not on the other people. So all those type of things, the police assist in terms of trying to tell the person to stop thinking in that way. However, the person who is thinking like that is the person who have think that at the end he had nothing to do but to just take the life. And it is difficult for a next person to know about somebody's mind in terms of what is it what the person thinks for now. And that's why it is very important for person himself or a person herself, if you feel that you have got a heavy things in your mind, in your heart, which you need to tell somebody, don't hesitate to tell someone, or ask the people who are professionals, social workers, psychologists, counselors, to talk to so that you can assist yourself to relieve a stress if it's a stress, because such things, it's become difficult for a person to know what a person thinks in most of the time. And
Mr. Makupela, with this particular case, is that what happened? What transpired when the police actually arrived at the scene? I understand there was quite a gap of time between, what could have happened between that time? Is there any role that the police could have played better if they'd known in time, perhaps?
I believe, yes, if the police have known this in time, it could have been better to talk to the person, maybe, which we cannot guarantee, maybe it should have been helped. But what is very important, as I've indicated, is for people to relate their problems to other people. Yes, police will arrive and will try their best to make sure that the person stop taking his life or her life by talking to that particular person. But the most important thing is for them to talk if they've got problems, so that those problems can relieve their stress in their minds, to rethink again that life is not about their problems only, but it's about different things which you can come across with and which you can solve sometimes if you meet with other people.
Yeah, if only it were that simple, isn't it? I mean, then there wouldn't be depression if people were able to talk. But thank you so much for that. That's Mr. Makupela, the South African Police Service spokesperson. I want to come to you, Camille. As the student's SRC, I understand this particular student was not actually living within the residential facility at the university, but it was an outside resident facility. Is there a difference when it comes to intervention with students that are around campus and students that are outside of campus if they have issues to do with depression or any other kind of help that they may need from the university?
Look, I think there's definitely a difference. By virtue of you being at an internal residence at Wits University, you have access to a lot more support structure. You have access to the residence assistants and the cluster managers and those kind of people who you could build a close relationship with. With external residences, it's very different because there's a very sort of client service provider relationship that you have with him, so there's no personal contact, and often the people who are the floor managers at the external residences aren't sufficiently trained to manage and to cope with it. And it's not within their jurisdiction to manage and cope with these kind of things.
Okay, so there's really no way of reviewing the policy to see how those students can also be incorporated, to see how they can be helped with support structures. I
mean, we definitely need to look at it, right? And I think it's a systemic issue. It's not something that can be addressed in the immediate, but definitely something that needs to be addressed as a systemic issue. And I think it speaks also to the greater issue where, in terms of capacity, you know, does the university itself have the capacity to be dealing with this? Because I know that at the moment, the Counselling and Careers Development Unit at Wits is under immense pressure. Just sheer numbers of students that are coming through their doors every day to seek for help.
Right. Well, at least they, they can, they have a support structure that they can go to. We also have from the South African Federation for Mental Health Program Manager for Information and Awareness, that's Mate Kutsia. Very good evening to you. Thank you for your patience and waiting for so long on hold. Now, just looking at the reactions, the outrage from, just from the society, even on social media, and all of a sudden everyone seems to be an expert when it comes to depression, that you must always talk about your problems. But it's really not that easy, is it? Especially with the different cultural diversities that we come from, from the black community or Indian or white. These things are handled differently. How do we bring awareness and information to such circumstances?
Good evening. Yes, it's very true what you say. The moment that something like this happens, especially on social media, everyone is suddenly an expert. And it's very easy to say, people must just talk about their problems. But unfortunately, when it comes to mental health, and especially something like suicide, there's still so much stigma and taboo that is attached to it, that it's incredibly difficult for people to talk about openly, especially like you mentioned, when it comes to culture. Unfortunately, we do still live in a culture, or in a country rather, where depression, for instance, and stress and anxiety is overwhelmingly still seen as a white person's illness. It's seen as something that doesn't affect black or colored people, and that's simply not the truth. But that makes it so difficult for young people to go to their families or to their friends and to try and talk about these things, because they're not sure how it's going to be treated. And even when it comes to certain religions, a lot of time the response might be, you know what, we just need to pray for you, or maybe you're possessed, maybe it's demonic, maybe someone's cursed you. So in South Africa, we still sit with all of these different beliefs that really get in the way of helping people to access help. So we do still have a long way to go, unfortunately, and that makes it so much more difficult for people when they need help to feel that they can actually reach out and ask for it.
So what intervention guidelines can we look at, particularly at a place where it's a college, it's a campus? There's a lot of students out there that come from different homes and different cultures.
I think the big thing is that students need to be aware of the support structures that are in place. I know that a lot of the universities, for instance, have counseling services, they have disability units, they have people there who are able to support students at no cost of their own, and students need to know about these services. But it also needs to be a thing of, in residences, in classes, in the places where students are hanging out, we need to be able to talk about these things openly. Because only when we are able to talk about mental health as openly as we can talk about, for instance, having cancer or having diabetes or having high cholesterol, will we actually get to a point where people are able to ask for help when they need it, and we won't get to a point where it's just too late and we can't help them anymore.
And Marte, perhaps you could help us with the psyche of a person that is threatening to commit suicide, especially in this particular incident. Case in point, she apparently reportedly was egged on to jump if she wanted to jump. Do you think that people, when they cry out for help, they're just trying to get attention? And how do we take this seriously? How do you deal with a person that has reached such a breaking point?
I think that people should never think that if someone says something like, I want to commit suicide, I wish I was dead, or if you see someone, for instance, standing on a ledge or doing something like that, that you should respond and say, you know what, I don't believe you. You're just trying to get attention. Our first response should always be to believe them and to try and help. I think that as a society, we have become too desensitized to trauma, to bad things happening, and we have lost empathy for each other, unfortunately.
Yeah. And just yes, please go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say, if you see someone who is in a state like that, it is very important to take what they say seriously and to treat them with respect and dignity, and to try as much as possible just to calm the situation down.
Well, just coming back into studio, Fasia, how do we make sure as a student activist that we have support structures that are out there, that people know that are there for them and that can actually help students across the country when it comes to issues of depression or any kind of mental health problems?
I must add on to what the SG of the Wits SRC has said. One of the problems is that it is private accommodation, right? And that doesn't mean that students who are in Wits or general university accommodation is not, or someone who faces this kind of difficulty. But part of the problem is that there is less support. There is less of an identification process. Very often, particularly with first years, accommodation officers, at least in a Wits residence, will try and know who the first years are, watch them. We do that for academic performance. But it's not just that. It's also about the emotional element. So perhaps or perhaps not, we won't know for sure, but in theory you should be able to pick it up faster. But also very importantly, it's not just about having a counselling service. Adam Habib and other university members have sent out, oh, please go to, the counselling development unit. And I can go there now, but they're overcapacitated. It's very difficult to get an appointment. I'm speaking from experience.
Wow.
And more importantly, because of the time in which we find ourselves, it's closer to final exams, more and more students are having breakdowns. There's just not enough capacity, right? But it also goes down to how we deal with the matter, right? So it's not just about having counselling. And I think Mate spoke about that, right? We need to remove this taboo on mental health. We need to, as friends, say, but in actual fact, that was wrong. In actual fact, my friend who's struggling, let me, intervene.
Yeah.
But at the same time, and this is the last thing I want to say, many people, particularly on social media, said that there were warning signs. Why didn't her friends say this? Why didn't they do that? These are also young people, 20, 19, 20, 21. We don't have the skills necessarily to help our friend who's going through so much to the point where she takes her life. And I think that there's a great deal of guilt and of pain that's being put onto these young people, and it's not their fault.
Yes, they ask themselves, what could I have done differently to perhaps save a life if I could?
It's not
We actually have a viewer that's on the phone line, Yusuf from Benoni. Very good evening to you. Thank you for joining us.
Yes,
your thoughts?
Yeah, what I want to mention is I think a student, they must have somebody with a hearty relationship, a personal friendship with somebody that you can relate your problems to, somebody you can talk to. And secondly is that the peer pressure that comes from the parents to excel. There's another type of pressure which children can't cope with. But they definitely need to talk to the personal friend where they can confine into. Somebody can give you a definite advice, but without any prejudice.
Right.
That's what I'd like to say. Thank you.
Yes, without getting any judgment, Yusuf, thank you so much for your thoughts. We certainly appreciate it. This whole issue of, a lot of pressure. I've been a student myself in college. There's societal pressures, there's family pressures, all kind of pressures that are really difficult to deal with. But how do you deal with issues of trauma? I like what Fasiha spoke about, like the people that were around her, perhaps having, feeling guilty that perhaps there's something that they could have done. I think at this point, counseling will need to apply to even to those people that were around her.
No, definitely. And we've put out a call as the SRC for anyone who was involved in the incident, be it a bystander, to come forth so that we can try and assist them as best as we possibly can. Obviously, we won't do it ourselves. We'll try to use the facilities that are available at the institution to try and help them. I know that there's been a commitment from the university to try and assist in this way as well. Dedicate a team from the counseling and development unit to try and assist with this. So, it's important also for those individuals to come forward. It's also difficult, sometimes you don't actually want to come forward and speak about it because you're still yourself within yourself are still dealing with the matter.
Yeah.
So it's important for us as an SRC also to go out and try and identify who those individuals are.
Yeah, because I would have thought maybe as the SCR you'd want to reach out to them, rather than have them come to you. But of course, whatever works is what's important. But we'll have to leave the discussion there. Thank you so much for joining us, guys. Unfortunately, under very tragic circumstances. Of course, our thoughts are with the family of the student who jumped to her death in Braamfontein Wits student. Here at home, thank you for joining in the conversation and for your participation, and to all my guests from South African Police Service, Kema Kupela. We also had Mateo Kutse, South African Federation for Mental Health, that's the Program Manager for Information and Awareness. Fasiha Hassan, student activist, joining me in studio, and also Kamil Ali, Wits SRC Deputy Secretary General. We have to take a short break. This is AN7 Prime. Do stay with us.